There is a boulevard in Paris so wide and straight that it feels less like a street and more like a line, drawn deliberately through the city. From one end, you can see far into the distance. Buildings align with unusual precision. Movement flows predictably. Crowds disperse naturally into open space. And at key points along the avenue, large monuments and government structures dominate the horizon, impossible to ignore no matter where a person stands. It feels elegant, organized, efficient, but it was also designed that way for another reason. In the mid-19th century, much of Paris was radically reconstructed under the direction of Georges-Eugène Haussmann during the reign of Napoleon III. Officially, the redesign addressed overcrowding, disease, poor sanitation, and transportation problems within the old medieval city, and those concerns were real. The narrow streets of older Paris had become congested, unhealthy, and difficult to manage. But the redesign also served another function. Wide boulevards made barricades harder to construct. Large open avenues improved military movement through the city. Visibility increased, control increased, and perhaps most importantly, the city itself began influencing how people moved, gathered, and behaved. This is not hidden history. Urban planners openly discuss how architecture shapes human activity. Streets influence movement patterns. Building placement affects emotion and perception. Public spaces encourage or discourage certain forms of interaction. Cities are not neutral environments. They guide behavior constantly, often without people noticing. And once this becomes visible, the pattern begins to appear almost everywhere. Ancient Roman cities frequently followed grid systems with remarkable consistency. Roads intersected at controlled angles. Public forums occupied central positions. Military efficiency and administrative orders shaped the layout itself. The official explanation is straightforward. Organization improves governance. Predictable layouts simplify movement, trade, taxation, and defense. And this is true. But organization also creates legibility. A city becomes easier to monitor when its structure is standardized. Movement becomes more predictable. Visibility improves. The environment itself begins participating in control. This does not necessarily imply oppression. Every functioning city requires some degree of order. Without structure, urban environments become chaotic and inefficient. But there is a subtle threshold where design stops merely supporting human activity and begins directing it. There are also architectural choices that operate psychologically rather than physically. Large government buildings often dominate surrounding areas through sheer scale. Monumental staircases force individuals to look upward. Massive columns and open plazas reduce the apparent size of the human figure moving through them. The emotional effect is immediate. The individual feels smaller. The institution feels permanent. This is intentional. Throughout history, architecture has been used not only to shelter populations, but to communicate authority. Palaces, temples, and administrative buildings were designed to project stability, power, and permanence long before modern media existed. And unlike language, architecture works continuously. People absorb it without needing explanation. There is also the contrast between older and newer city structures. Medieval cities often developed organically narrow winding streets. Irregular pathways, dense neighborhoods built gradually over time. These environments can feel intimate, unpredictable, difficult to navigate. In contrast, many later urban redesigns introduced wider roads, clearer sightlines, and more open spaces. Officially, this improved sanitation and transportation, but it also transformed visibility itself. A narrow street hides crowds. A wide boulevard exposes them. This distinction became especially important during periods of political unrest. In several historical cases, city redesigns followed revolutions, uprisings, or social instability. Urban planning became partially linked to crowd management and state control. Again, this is not conspiracy. It is documented urban history. Governments understood that physical space influences social behavior, and over time, cities increasingly reflected that understanding. There is also the matter of repetition. Across different countries and political systems, similar patterns emerge repeatedly. Centralized monuments, administrative districts positioned prominently, streets radiating outward from symbolic centers of power. The styles differ. The principle remains. Human movement organized around authority, There are practical reasons for this. Centralization improves efficiency. Infrastructure functions better when systems are coordinated. But psychologically, these environments create more than efficiency. They create orientation. Cities quietly teach people where importance exists, which spaces feel official, which areas invite gathering, which areas discourage lingering. This influence extends even into smaller details. Lighting placement affects nighttime movement. Bench design influences whether people rest or move on. Public squares encourage assembly, while certain layouts fragment crowds naturally. Modern urban planners openly study these effects, not necessarily to control populations maliciously, but to shape behavior in ways considered beneficial for safety, commerce, or organization. And yet, the underlying principle remains the same. Space influences behavior, often more effectively than rules themselves, because architecture operates continuously, silently, without requiring enforcement. There is also a deeper psychological layer to consider. Most people experience cities passively. Streets feel natural simply because they already exist. Movement patterns become habitual. Visual hierarchies fade into the background through repetition. But cities are designed environments. Every road, intersection, staircase, and public square emerged from decisions made by someone, and those decisions reflect priorities. Sometimes economic, sometimes aesthetic, sometimes political, often all three at once. This becomes especially visible in capital cities. Government districts frequently occupy elevated positions or central axes. Monuments align with major avenues. Buildings intended to symbolize permanence are constructed at scales far beyond ordinary human proportion. The city itself becomes symbolic infrastructure, not just functional space. And perhaps this is why certain places feel psychologically different even before we consciously analyze them, because humans respond instinctively to spatial organization. Open areas create exposure. Narrow spaces create compression. Height creates awe. Symmetry creates order. These responses are deeply embedded in perception, which means architecture does not merely surround human life. It shapes emotional experience continuously. There is also the uncomfortable possibility that modern cities extend these principles further than older ones ever could. Surveillance systems, traffic flow analysis, behavioral data, zoning algorithms, urban environments increasingly combine physical design with digital observation. The city becomes measurable in real time, predictable, responsive. Again, the official goals are usually practical: efficiency, safety, optimization, and often those goals are achieved. But optimization itself introduces another question. Optimize for whom? Because every design system ultimately reflects priorities established by institutions, governments, corporations, or planners. And over time, those priorities become embedded physically into the environment people move through every day. Most individuals never notice this directly. They simply follow the pathways available to them, which may be the most effective form of influence possible. Not visible force, not explicit control, just environments designed carefully enough that people move naturally in the intended direction. And perhaps that is what makes certain cities feel subtly unsettling when examined closely, not because they are oppressive in an obvious sense, but because they reveal how deeply physical environments shape human behavior without requiring conscious awareness. The streets guide movement, the buildings shape perception, the layout organizes attention, all quietly, all continuously. This does not mean cities are secret machines of control, but it does suggest that architecture and power have always been connected, more closely than most people realize, because once large populations gather together, the organization of space becomes inseparable from the organization of society itself. And perhaps that is why old cities still feel psychologically powerful today, not only because of their history, but because the intentions embedded into their design continue functioning long after the people who planned them are gone. The boulevards remain, the monuments remain, the sightlines remain, still guiding movement, still shaping emotion, still quietly influencing the people who walk through them, whether they notice it or not.